How's it going, everybody? I am ZBilbs and I'm back here with another metal albums ranked video. Today I am diving back into another black metal band because I am going over Enslaved. Now, if you are familiar with my channel, you'll know that this last year I got into some black metal bands for the first time. I did Agalok, Alcest, and Dimmu Borgir, so I was itching to get into another one. Now, you should know all of those bands, and including Enslaved, all have a similar vibe in that they're not just strictly black metal. They're not a Dark Throne, a Mayhem, a Burzum. They're more a mixed black metal with another style of music, whether it be symphonic, atmospheric. In the case of Enslaved, it's progressive black metal. Because I'm still very new to black metal and more extreme types of metal, I need something to take the edge off of it a little bit, and so that's why Enslaved was another really good kind of gateway, kind of baby's first black metal band. Even though Enslaved is one of the most acclaimed black metal, or maybe even just metal bands in general, a lot of people say there's not really any bad albums. And I'd say they do have a really strong discography. One theme, because I still, when it comes to black metal, I like clean vocals more than I do black metal vocals. I like a little bit of black metal vocals, but just a little bit as a spice for it. But I like the clean first and foremost. So unlike most black metal fans, the first half or so of Enslaved discography is not really my thing. I like stuff from it, but it's not until you get into the latter half where it's stuff that I really enjoy. So just like a warning going into this, that a lot of people's favorites Enslaved albums are probably going to be pretty low on the list, just because I am so new to Black Album and I don't like that more raw, aggressive stuff. But either way, without further ado, let's just get into the rankings. Starting off at number 16, I have got an album that's a lot of people's absolute favorite Enslaved album, and that is Frost. Now, this is their sophomore album. A lot of people love it, and probably because it's considered like one of like the coldest, like iciest black metal albums. And for me, that isn't really my style when it comes to black metal or metal. There's very few songs where there's clean vocals. Like, kind of just feels like a straight up black metal album with some, I don't know, some Viking Nordic vibes to it a little bit, which isn't really my thing. There's a couple of songs I like on here. Yggdrasil, I think, is the one really solid one. I think it's the one song where it's just a clean vocals throughout it. It sounds like just like a fun folk song. And also Gylfaginning. There's a lot of really hard songs to pronounce. That's another one that's all right, but the rest, don't really love, just not really my thing. I can't say it's bad at all. This album just doesn't really do anything for me. Complete personal preference. But yeah, moving on to number 15, I have got Mardrum. This is an album that I've seen people either absolutely love it in the case of Metal Trenches, or people think it's one of the worst in case of Quest for Metal. And I'm more so on one of the worst Enslaved albums. Obviously, there's probably not objectively any bad Enslaved albums. There's definitely a handful that I don't like very much because I don't like the more aggressive black metal stuff. And this one is definitely that case. It's a pretty heavy album. It's a pretty aggressive, fast-paced album. So there's a lot of like really interesting musicianship and guitar stuff. But once again, there's very few of the more like kind of clean, beautiful parts that I like of the latter half of Enslaved discography. So it ends up making it that there isn't much that I come back to for this album. There's a handful of songs that are pretty good. Probably Entrance Escape is my favorite song from this album. There's some other alright ones. Story Ented, Dau Dinnegadavida, Freuesmik, Eigesdrum, butchering those. So there's some good stuff, but Entrance Escape is really the only song from this album I come back to. So once again, it's hard to say whether this is necessarily a good or bad album. It's just another one that I don't really vibe with. All right, next up at number 14, I have got Bloodhem. This is another one that is, early album for Enslaved. I think it's their fourth album. It's still very much their early black metal style of just more straight up black metal, Viking metal. This is probably the most Viking metal out of all of their albums. So it does have a kind of unique vibe to it. It's also one of the more, raw albums out of their earlier stuff, which isn't really my vibe, but unlike something like Frost and Mardrum, there's a couple of songs here where I kind of like that raw style a little bit more. It kind of works to its credit, at least when they mix in the rawness with some more clean vocals. Like songs like An Eye for Mimir and In Chains Until Ragnarok are both two songs that I think are actually really solid, and I come back to a decent amount. And then other ones like Brisinghamen and Sutungsmjod also are all right songs. Obviously, I still think the majority of the songs on this album just aren't really my thing, but there is some interesting stuff here. So yeah, that is Bloodhem at 14. Moving on to 13, ahead of Bloodhem just by a bit, I've got Eld. This one, it's very similar to Bloodhem in its style. I'd say not quite as raw as Bloodhem, not quite as kind of a Viking-y style as it, but I'd say what gives it the edge over Bloodhem is it's got like one of the best epics that Enslaved has, and that is 793. That's just a long, super awesome, super interesting song. Some other good ones on here: Alpha Blut, Hordelegedingen, and at the title track Eld. So there's some solid songs on here. Obviously, similar criticisms I've said with all of the earlier stuff. I don't vibe with a lot of the straight up raw black metal stuff, but there is some good mixing of clean and black metal in here that I gravitate to, and then the long track is what really lifts it up a little bit more. So another all right album, but still not quite my thing yet. Moving on to number 12, I have got another one that's a lot of people's favorites, although you could make that case for about the entire discography, and that is Below the Lights. This one is the album I heard that was kind of the transition, because the early stuff in Enslaved is more black metal and less progressive, and this was supposed to be the transition where they become more progressive and then with the black metal edge to it. And there's multiple semi-transitions in Enslaved's discography, and while this one is more progressive, it's not till we get to like Vertebrae where it's really the amount of progressiveness that I more gravitate to. So it still wasn't quite my style. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in here, like Havenless. That is just a super interesting song. Some other decent ones, The Dead Stare, The Crossing, Queen of the Night are also solid. But then there's other ones that people absolutely love, like basically the rest of the album, that I just not really interested into, just because they are still very heavy on that black metal, like traditional black metal style, and so it doesn't really do anything for me. So while I definitely appreciate for what this album is and what it's going for, and I can see why hardcore black metal fans absolutely love this album, once again, not my style, so it's coming in at 12. Moving on to number 11, another similar one that's kind of considered as another transition piece, and that is Monumention. Now this album is really weird. It's definitely different than any other Enslaved album, in that it feels like it almost has like this cosmic trippy vibe to it. It's hard to describe what it is. It's definitely more progressive in a sense than Below the Lights, but it's different. It doesn't have that, I don't know, like kind of Nordic, I don't know, wilderness Viking vibe to it. It's really weird, but I do kind of like the weirdness in a lot of senses. Like songs like The Sleep, Floating Diversity, The Monument 3, Cromlech Gate, Hollow Inside, The Voices, Convoys to Nothingness are all decent songs. They're all kind of weird, and some of the other songs in this album don't hit quite as hard, but I do end up enjoying this album a decent amount. It's not the style of Enslaved that I like the most, but there is a decent amount where I'm like, yeah, that was pretty all right. All right, moving on to number 10, I have another that's commonly cited as a favorite, and that is Isa. This is one where kind of Issa and Rune are also seen as like another stepping stone to their more progressive style. And as I've already said, it's not till we get quite to Vertebrae where I'm fully sold on that new style. But there is some good stuff. It's still like a very kind of blackened, like dark style to it. So once again, it's a little bit hard to get into some of this stuff, but it does have some absolutely great banger tracks on here. The title track Esau is great. Return to Yggdrasil, Bounded by Allegiance, and definitely the best song in this that holds it up for me is Neogenesis. The rest, not really a big fan of. So I mean, it's an all right album. There's some good songs, but it's not super consistent in how many tracks it has that I will consistently return to. So once again, another album that I can see why people appreciate it a lot, but not really my thing. Moving on to number 9, you're probably surprised I haven't listed this one yet, and that is Viking Veldi, their debut album. And this is the one like old Enslaved album that I actually like a decent amount. Unlike all of the albums that come after it, like these, it's like, 5 or 6 songs, and they're all just kind of long, epic tracks. And it actually has a lot more of like a progressive style to a lot of these songs. The black metal vocals and edge to it isn't quite as abrasive as other albums like Frost, Bloodhem, Mardrum. And so I can actually get into a lot of these songs here and just appreciate them for this interesting, I don't know, progressive style that it has with a little black metal edge to it. And I like pretty much every song in this album. Vetronaut is probably my favorite. Midgard's Elder, Norvigir are also pretty solid. So while obviously I think all the songs in this album are pretty good, they still, this album, they're still figuring out their style, and just the kind of the long, basically just instrumentals for a lot of this isn't like my favorite style of Enslaved, obviously, but it is one that I do come back to from time to time and have a good time with. So yeah, moving on to number 8. This is where I'd say, I've said it's kind of Vertebrae where we get the transition where I'm like kind of fully sold. This one I think is kind of more so a stepping stone to that point, and that is Rune. Now, Rune, a lot of people kind of see it as a companion piece to Issa, but actually, I think it's a decent amount of difference than Issa. It's not quite as having this blackened edge to it. It feels a little bit more progressive. It has a little bit more amount of clean vocals to it that allows me to jive with it a little bit more. More of these tracks I see myself coming back to more. My favorite song on this album is Essence. That's just a perfect blend of black metal and clean vocals, just a super awesome song. It's one of my favorite Enslaved songs overall. And then there's just a decent, consistent amount of songs that I also think hold up pretty well. Heir to the Cosmic Seed, title track Rune, Apivat, Tides of Chaos, Fusion of Sense and Earth. So unlike Issa, This one has a little bit better of a style that appeals to me more. It has a little bit more of a consistent quality, and so overall I think it is one of the better Enslaved albums for me. Moving on to number 7, I have got one of their newer albums, and that is E. This one, I think they traded out vocalists for this album. I don't know how many like clean vocalists they have, but this one, it's still a really good singer. If we're talking about bonus tracks, which I'm not including Calculation, What Else Is There is one of my favorite Enslaved songs overall. But there's some other really good stuff in this song. Storm Sun is a great way to open it. The River's Mouth, Axis of the Worlds is all right. Feathers of Elo, or Eol, I don't know. But this album, it's really solid. It's not quite as high as some other Enslaved albums because while there is some good songs, there isn't a large volume of great songs, and none of these songs, besides the bonus track that I'm not really counting, I would say are like a top tier Enslaved song. So while this does have the style of Enslaved that I gravitate to the most, meaning more progressive, more clean vocals with a blackened edge to it, it doesn't do it quite as well as some ones that are coming up here soon, but still a really solid album, so that is E at number 7. All right, moving on to number 6, I have got Axioma Ethica Odini. This is where I think they're now firmly cemented in their style. I think this one comes after Vertebrae, and it's just a really solid, consistently good album. It's kind of hard to describe a lot of these albums coming up, what in particular makes it better than the other one, because I think they've all got kind of the style of Enslaved that I really like. It all just kind of comes down to how many songs do they have on it that I really like. And this has definitely got some really solid ones. Ethica Odini, Radho, Wayrune, Night Sight, Lightning, and my favorite on this album is Giants. I would say Giants and maybe Radho are the only like top tier Enslaved songs. The rest are just decent, which is why it's probably not quite as high as some coming up. But this is just a really well-rounded, solid Enslaved album, so that's coming in at 6. Moving on to number 5, I've got a newer one, and that is Utgard. This one, I've kind of seen it as like this is the worst version of Heimdall that just came out, and I think that kind of does a disservice to it, because for me personally, obviously, I think this is one of the better Enslaved albums overall. This album, it's just really consistent in quality. It's got a lot of just really, really solid songs, some top tier Enslaved songs. It's got a great vibe to it. Just a nice, I don't know, Nordic, like, out on the sea in the wilderness vibe that Enslaved does so well. Some of the songs that help encapsulate that, Fires in the Dark, Homebound, Storms of Utgard, those are probably my favorites on the album, but there's other solid ones. Distant Seasons, Flight of Thought and Memory, Orhotun, Sequence. So like there's very few misses in this album. It's incredibly consistent in quality, but not quite as many top tier songs as some of these other albums. I would say it's basically just Homebound, Storms of Utgard that are like some of the better ones. So good album, actually really good album, if not great, but there are better ones yet to come. Like number 4, and that is Vertebrae. This is an album that I've seen listed near one of the weaker Enslaved albums. And maybe it's just because this was the album that finally made me go, okay, this is something that I can get into, because the first like 8 albums on this, I was like, is this like really a band I can get into? And once I heard this album, I was like, okay, I see, I can vibe with this. because this is it makes it lighter. It makes the style not as aggressive, not as abrasive. It takes the black metal out of the forefront, and it makes it more of like a mix with the clean vocals with the progressive style of music, and that was just the perfect style for me. But there's also, even without like that new style that ushered me into really liking Enslaved, there's some really solid songs that I think still hold a candle to some of the better ones of Enslaved, like The Watcher, absolutely excellent. Vertebrae is the title track, my favorite on the album. I think it's great. Clouds and Ground are also great. Some other decent ones are To the Coast and New Dawn. So another like just really consistent quality, some top tier songs. So just a really solid album that I think is slept on. Moving on to number 3, I have got the newest Enslaved album, and that is Heimdall. Now, if you watched my favorite albums of the year list, I put this as my 4th favorite of the year, because it's just an absolutely great album. This is, it's doing the same vibe, the same style as Utgard. It doesn't have quite as many songs, but basically every single one is great. And the songs that do hit really hard hit even harder than the best of Utgard, which is why it's even higher. Songs like The Eternal Sea and Heimdall are some of the best Enslaved songs overall. There's other really great ones like Behind the Mirror. A lot of people absolutely love Forest Dweller. I like that one not as much as most people. Kingdom, Caravans to the Outer Worlds are really good. It's only, I think, Congelia, or however you say that is I don't really like much. But once again, like almost every single song on this album I vibe with, and it's got some of the better Enslaved songs overall. It's not higher just because these next 2 I think are absolute masterpieces, but still a great album, so that's Heimdall at 3. Moving on to 2, this was close between these top 2, but I had to go with In Times. This album, I mean, it's only 6 tracks long, but every single track is a good song. Like, there is no filler, no fluff. Every single one is good, and they're long tracks, so it's harder for me to vibe with longer tracks because it has more time to kind of lose me, like, oh, okay, it's going on and on and on. But man, some obviously there are tracks that are stronger than others, but every single one has something that keeps me going all the way to the end of it. Let's see, some of my favorites: Thursaz Dreaming, In Times, 1,000 Years of Rain, and then my absolute favorite, this is probably like my 2nd or 3rd favorite Enslaved song overall, is Building with Fire. I think that song absolutely kicks ass. So yeah, this is just, it's got some absolutely excellent songs. It is probably the most consistent in quality, considering there's not a single bad track on this album. It's short, it's concise, it's to the point, and it's just an absolutely great album. But moving on to my number 1 favorite album, and that is Retier. This album is just an absolute masterpiece, and that's even with the fact that I think the first 4 tracks on this album are absolutely masterful, like 10 out of 10, amazing. The latter half is not quite as strong, I think. I'd say maybe only half of those latter half songs I actually like, and the ones that I do like aren't as strong as the first half. But I think the first half of this album is so strong that it single-handedly propels this to my favorite. Like my top 5 favorite Enslaved songs, I'd say 3 out of the 5 are from this album. Going over it, I think Retier and Forsaken are good songs, but my favorites on this album, definitely Thoughts Like Hammers, Death in the Eyes of Dawn, Veil Burner, and my favorite Enslaved song, Roots of the Mountain, is absolutely amazing, 10 out of 10 songs. And so those single-handedly, like, it's the perfect style of Enslaved, of the nice progressive clean metal vocals with a blackened edge to it. That is just absolutely just chef's kiss amazing. But yeah, that is Retier, my favorite Enslaved album. So that is it for my list. So let me know in the comments, how would you rank the Enslaved albums? What are some other sort of introductory black metal albums or bands that you think I could get into? Let me know what other videos you'd like to see me do in the future. But that is all I've got for you, so I will see you later.